Welcome back, everybody, to the Game Development live stream. This is the live stream for an industry audience where we bring in every week CEOs, CTOs, designers working on games. And this is for an industry audience. Of course, everybody's welcome to join in. You're welcome to kind of get the inside baseball view of the game industry. We welcome you here. But the real idea here is to bring together game developers to talk to game developers, help everybody get better at the craft, learn more about the business. That's the goal here. So I am Jon Radoff. I'm the CEO of Beamable. We are a gaming infrastructure company, so we help make the back end work for your game. So cloud infrastructure, social systems, economic systems, all of that. And today I am broadcasting live from Consensus, which is the biggest Web3 conference in North America. I've been talking to game studios all week. That's really fun. But we're not actually here to talk about Web3 today. We're here to talk about SunSpear Games. So I'd love to introduce Ian. Ian, before we even dive into the game that you're developing, why don't you share your background, kind of what brought you to game development and what you're doing today and your team, and then we'll dive into the game and talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. Excited to be here. I think a lot of folks in the games industry have interesting origin stories, if you will, and I'm no different. I was actually always on a path to becoming an actor. I was a theater major, did a lot of plays in high school and through college, and then through a couple of twists and turns of life, really got into entrepreneurship. And so I co-founded a business back in 2009. That was my first one. That went pretty successfully. And then a couple more after that. And this is my third. I'm obviously a lifelong gamer. I was playing, Command and Conquer 95 way back in the day with a neighbor friend of mine who lived across the street. Took us 2 hours to do all the IP matchups to try to play with each other. I was there from the beginning with StarCraft and BattleNet and how that changed multiplayer gaming forever. And I got really into the content creation side, especially in the RTS scene. So I loved making custom maps in StarCraft Brood War and later in StarCraft 2. And that was one of the things that connected me to the other co-founders. This is well before we actually founded SunSpear Games. One of my co-founders, Dylan, I actually met in college in Washington State. And the others were all major content creators, map makers, and modders in the StarCraft 2 community. So I kind of moved from a focus on other more, I guess you could say, traditional or goods-based businesses and entrepreneurship in that space. And I got swept away by this vision with these guys that, man, these modding communities, right? These community souls and hearts, they create so much talent when it comes to the design space. There's so many cool projects, so many incredible volunteers, that are helping to come up with new ideas around these spaces. And this is, of course, shortly after League of Legends came out and Counter-Strike and things. And we kept seeing how modding teams were really contributing to real innovation in game development. And so we said, man, if we got all of these top modders together from the RTS scene, we brought them into a single company, we could create the product that would be the next benchmark RTS title that would set the standard for what RTS would be going forward. And so that's kind of how that started. A few other things about me. I love to travel. I think I've been to over 50 countries at this point. Obviously travel mostly for work these days. Like you, I'm a road warrior, going to conferences all over the world. That really enjoy that. Love seeing new cultures, different ideas. I love to just be a sponge for concepts and perspectives. I spend a very large amount of time in Latin America, pretty fluent in Spanish, and I love the teams that are building games down there. It's just been a real hotbed of talent, I think. I love geography and maps. Actually, the one creative part of the company that I still do, because mostly I'm on the operations side these days, but I actually create the atlases for our world maps. And so I still love that. And of course, I still have a soft spot in my heart for theater. So you'll generally find me, traveling, watching theater, or poring over atlases.
I love your background in the arts, basically. I mean, my personal experience, before I was running Beamable, I ran a game studio, and we built games based on Star Trek and Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. So I don't know, just a few interesting points there. So it's amazing to me how many people I've worked with in game studios who come from completely non-traditional backgrounds, but a lot of the humanities. So from theater, people who played guitar in rock bands, people who were like an English major and then they became a computer programmer. Like, I feel like that's the norm in the game industry, rather than like you go to school, get a game design degree, and now you're the game developer. It's much more a fusion of so many different skills. Interesting point on that actor thing. Like, one of the most fun things I ever did in working on a game is, so when we worked on Star Trek, I got to work with John Delancey, who, if anyone's a Star Trek fan, so he played the character of Q. And, we hired him originally thinking, okay, he's going to be the voice actor to help with a couple things. But he was so creative, and he helped us actually think through a lot of the story. Like, so we actually ended up bringing him in, and he helped us develop a lot of the content of the game and just sort of the whole, he imported a lot of concepts from theater and from acting that actually paid off a lot in building the narrative for the game, which I thought was really interesting. And John Delancey is, by the way, just a marvelous human being, who's a delight to work with. So
I believe it. Actually, one quick thing that I'd agree with there is, it's funny how many of our team members, when we hired them or first got together with them, we didn't know, but just how many of them had, especially a music background, right? It is true. It feels like a lot of the people that end up in game development, even if they're more on the technical side, have some deep kind of artistic passion that comes through. So SunSpear Games karaoke nights have been pretty legendary. And we have a great time.
There's something weird about music, that it combines like the creative expression, but it's also kind of the most mathematical of the art forms. And that fusion somehow is the right brain structure for a lot of what happens in game design as well. So I want to get into a little more of now the game and what we should take a moment to talk about the game that you're building and then the history behind it. And
seems fair.
Oscar, I don't know if we have any videos or anything we can share of the game. That would be great. But before we do that, this is my moment in time where I have to mention this is a live broadcast, and we do it live for a reason. Like, we could just do these in YouTube videos. That's what I actually used to do 2 or 3 years ago. The great thing about being live is we get to engage you, the community. And I already see comments from people. There's people here excited about RTS games. This is your chance to ask questions. So Ian is an expert in RTS games. So if you're curious about that and their journey, and you have specific questions about how they're thinking about this genre, like, here's your opportunity. Or, by the way, ask anything about game design, building a team, funding a game, what the current market is like. All of these things are totally on point for our audience. So the way you can do that is just post a question on any of these channels. We are simulcasting on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, X. All right, we're all over the place. You can post on any of those channels and we'll see it. And we can surface your comment and respond to it, or ask Ian to answer it. Or if you've got a camera and you want to be super bold, Oscar can send you the link to actually join StreamYard, and we'll bring you on camera. Like we are that crazy on this broadcast. Let us know if you'd want to join in. We consider it an open forum for conversation. All right, Ian, let's maybe talk about the game itself. What do people need to know about the game you're building?
Should we take a look at the trailer first?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do it.
One momento.
It is time that I showed you the power of a true god.
A great foe is upon us. Come to me in righteous war, angel. Stand firm, soldiers! Heaven is with us!
Kneel or be destroyed.
I pity you, Orzu.
Your armor will make a fine trophy.
Cease this madness. The crown's burden is too great for thee.
You have forsaken my trust. Such sacrilege demands retribution.
I am salvation!
Steel yourself for judgment.
So first of all, Ian, I love the voiceover in this game. Like,
Thank you.
Voiceover is actually people don't think of this, but I think sometimes people think, oh, VO is a thing we add at the final moments of the game's production. But for an RTS game where there's so much of like the vibe of the experience and the characters and the units, like that's a big part of it. And I sensing your own acting background and your appreciation for that craft coming across in the game.
I appreciate that, and I think you make a great point. It is funny. I think it is a little bit of the actor in me, but I get so frustrated when I hear bad voice acting. Oh my goodness, and can really pull me out of an experience. And our game has such an incredibly deep lore in the factions, in the immortals, in the characters. And by its style, it's not an RPG. You're not a single character going through and discovering a story. There's lore about the world. There are things to discover. But a lot of that lore, a lot of the setting, a lot of the gravity of the universe has to get communicated through those vocal barks, right? Through those conversations between immortals, through the things that the individual units are saying when you're clicking on them. Right. And that makes such a difference to the end user experience. And we have players that, claim to be not big time RTS players, but have just kind of heard some of the barks or like playing with the units. And now they're in the community and saying like, wow, I got to get more into this lore. And we think that increasingly that's something that players are looking for. They're looking for worlds to inhabit. Not always a fantasy world or an imaginary one, but they're looking for spaces to come together with their friends, become experts in those spaces, become really familiar. And so for us, it was really important to build a world and lore from the ground up. And in order to support and communicate that vision, the voice acting was critical. And I appreciate you seeing that and pointing that out.
So, Ian, what's it like building an RTS game today, and what do you feel the market is like? I mean, RTS is, for me, historically, one of my favorite genres. I was a huge Warcraft player, StarCraft 1 and 2, like Command and Conquer you mentioned, was a big player of that. So I love the genre. It feels like one that has not grown proportionally with the market over the last few years. I'm just curious, like, why do you think that is? And now what is it like building an RTS game in today's market?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I will say that one of the things that's been really exciting to see, and we'll give them a quick shout out, but Tempest Rising, right? They've been consistently top 5 on Steam pretty much ever since they went live just over a month ago, I think it was. And obviously really good experience. If you're looking for the CNC experience, I've been seeing a lot of folks in the chat praising Command & Conquer. If you haven't checked it out already, check out Tempest Rising. It is such an authentic spiritual successor to that game. It's a really, really good and tight experience. But before that, there has been a bit of a slowdown, right? RTS games were made extensively throughout the 90s and into the 2000s. They were the genre that birthed esports, right? StarCraft, Brood War was exploded in South Korea and became kind of the world's first esport, and it was still a regionalized experience for those of us super nerds that were passionate about it. We would have to get up in the middle of the night to catch these tournaments, right? And then StarCraft 2, Blizzard really turned that experience, that esport experience, and made it global, and that kind of birthed esports. And now, of course, it's expanded dramatically and gone all sorts of different directions. And kind of through that, I think really exploded and expanded streamer culture, right? And influencers as well. I think it played a huge role in that. So RTS is one of these foundational building blocks, not just of esports, but also of other game genres. The number of game genres as we separately define them kind of today, MOBAs, right, was originally an RTS mod from Warcraft 3. Auto battlers, right, largely based on direct strike mods from StarCraft. There are so many different game experiences that can be created out of the building blocks of RTS because it gives you such flexibility in terms of what you can build, that it has kind of underwritten a huge amount of the creativity, I think, broadly across the game industry. So what happened? Why isn't everyone making an RTS anymore? Well, I think a few things happened. One, RTS has traditionally been a very lonely experience, and the game industry overall moved from a solitary one towards a more social one with the advent of online gaming. And RTSs didn't really adapt. StarCraft 2 did eventually create a co-op mode that is still their most popular and most played mode, as I recall. But it was significantly into the process. It didn't come out till well after Legacy of the Void had already been released. So when MOBAs came out, and MOBAs were originally called RTSs when they were created, they gave you a very different experience, one that's much more micro-focused and less macro-focused, one that had a character that you could identify with and customize. It was really the birth of free-to-play in a big way, which was a new monetization model that made getting into the games feel a lot less of a commitment. And it was a social experience, right? Even though sometimes that social experience was toxic, and we learned lessons from that, it was a very different experience to have teammates than to always be the sole player responsible for your success or defeat. And because StarCraft 2 especially, I think, dominated the market so strongly for so long, most of the other companies didn't feel like there was a really good opportunity to break into that turf. And then the few companies that did try, I think, discovered that in these shifting player expectations, we need to create an experience that is more social, more accessible, but they often did that at the expense of some of the depth. One of the things players love about RTS is the endless skill grind, right? Like there is an unachievable top level that the best players in the world can get to. And so it became this question of, could anybody ever find the silver bullet, right? How do you balance the skill floor getting dropped to the point that a mid-core social player can really enjoy your experience while maintaining this unsolvable skill ceiling that means there's always progress to be made, and meaning that on the esports side and the professional player side, there's real compelling gameplay. And that's basically what we spent years trying to solve. So we brought together all of the top modders, like every single one of the top mods, Starbow and One Goal and a bunch of others from StarCraft 2. We recruited those designers, the best map designers, right? Most of the StarCraft 2 professional circuit. was done on community-made maps, is something that people aren't aware of. So we recruited the guys that made those community maps because that they're just incredible. And we brought them all together and we said, okay, if we were to create a gaming experience that addressed modern player needs, right, with their communities, so thousands of play testers giving us quick iterative, how would we build it? And several mods.
Looks like we might have a technical glitch at the moment. Oscar, what are you seeing here?
Hey, Ian. I can see you, John. Ian, are you there?
Looks like
One moment.
Ian might have dropped off the internet in the middle of talking about modding.
Here.
Stand by while we... So the one downside of live TV is internet live streaming technology is nowhere near as reliable as TV sets from years ago at this point. Like,
Yeah, I don't have my technical difficulties interstitial here. Let's see. Nope. There you are.
yeah. Well, so I think we're going to wait for Ian to come back. He's dropped off, but Ian was just starting to talk about the importance of modding in this market. It's really interesting to kind of think about the emergence of UGC not only being a way to extend games, but it's actually become a driver of new games. And that's everything from what we're talking about there, Counter-Strike and formation of the entire MOBA genre, but also essentially the entirety of Roblox, most of what happens in Minecraft. Ian, thanks for reconnecting there. We were sort of
we were beefing for a second talking about user-generated content.
the importance of UGC and player-created content modding has gone from just being a way to extend game experience. It's actually driving the creation of major new games, which sounds like you're really leveraging that in your game because you went to the best modders who worked on StarCraft. And
do you think UGC really is like a prerequisite now in order to like really drive like success? But I'm trying to think of games that don't support it now.
I do think that UGC is incredibly valuable in terms of not only extending the lifespan of your game by creating new content, but creating new content that is often better than you as the studio could create for your community. Community members being a part of that community, and not only that, but because they generally need to assemble a team of like-minded people to support a project, they are really in touch with what people are looking for, right? One of the amazing things when we're bringing together all of these top modders is we found that there wasn't a whole lot of ego in that space. There couldn't be. Egos were driven out, right? At the end of the day, everything had to be based on the data and based on the feedback, right? It's one of the reasons that I think we ended up with such an incredible design team is because they're consistently looking for ways to improve. And so I do think that one of the things we want to do, for instance, with user-generated content, we want to find ways to really reward players, right? With whether it's in-game assets or currency or recognition or, maybe for some of the best modders, even jobs at the company. We want to really support them in the content that they're creating because we know that they are going to create some amazing experiences that we wouldn't know to create ourselves because they have these different ideas. And that's the value of not only having all of these perspectives, but the global player base as well, right? People from different countries often see things differently in terms of, oh, this is a sort of experience that I think will really appeal to a lot of my friends. And then by letting people create those projects and letting them compete with each other, if you will. You can see which ones rise to the top. And we feel that traditionally, this is going back a decade or so, when UGC was a big deal, but it wasn't really supported, we saw some of the limitations there. And I think, I missed part of your conversation and I was attempting to reconnect. Apologies about that. But if you were talking about like Fortnite and Roblox and things like that, we're seeing how we are moving to a new era of user-generated content that is kind of an in-between between modding and actually game development. People are creating new experiences. They're sometimes monetizing those experiences. And I actually would encourage people that are curious about game development to go and play with those tools and attempt to create experiences in mods or as UGC in those games, because it teaches you a lot of the things that you really need to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the introduction a lot of people have to games now. Like, I'm thinking my son, for example, so he's 13, and he like goes into the Terraria editor and stuff there, or Geometry Dash, and does level design there. So like that's his introduction to game design, and it's actually a really smart business model in addition to what you're talking about, which is like crowdsourcing the best content so that you get great stuff to do. But from a business model standpoint, you can contrast it with something like building an MMORPG, and like, why is World of Warcraft this virtually insurmountable MMORPG? Although, there are a couple of others that are super relevant in the MMORPG market, but part of it is that spent like, I don't know, $1 billion plus at this point just making content to go explore. So it's really hard to give people the runway in the game experience in that kind of game unless you're going to finance this absolutely massive multi-year content development effort versus, say, the Minecraft model, where you actually just open up pure creativity and allow the players to be the ones who then build on top of it and create things. And it sounds like you're going to lean heavily into that with your community. How are you going to frame that and structure it? What are the incentives? How do you actually bring that to the players, like versus sort of maybe the RTS games we know from 20 years ago, where it was sort of clunky level editors and you could figure out how to do it, and eventually people would do modding, but it was almost sort of like a side activity, as opposed to, it sounds like it'll be much more central to your community experience, if I'm getting what you're explaining correctly.
We'd like it to be. I would maybe push back on the idea that they were super clunky. I mean, they were, because everything back in the day was clunky, but the Galaxy editors and the Warcraft 3 editors they give you a lot of flexibility to do things. And I think that's where a lot of the modern map editors have kind of built off of. So they did a pretty good job, especially for the time. But what we want to do is we really want to highlight and focus on those experiences more. And to be clear, this will probably not be, certainly this won't be an early access thing. We're hoping to have it in for 1.0. It might come a few months after that, because part of the issue is to have a really robust, fully tooled modding set, you need a relatively finalized game that is very, very stable, right? The modding tools are going to help break things even further. So things need to be really quite polished and finalized at that point. So that's one of when people say like, oh, why don't we already have a modding environment set up? It's because the game is still not quite polished or stable enough to allow for it. But ultimately, we want to encourage people to check out the modding tools. We want to work with the community to create better modding tools and address the things they're looking to create within the ecosystem. We want to highlight them through community showcase events and tournaments. And we want to find ways to incentivize and reward people. And that is, you said, well, what could those incentives look like? We have a number of ideas, but ultimately we think we need to see how the community is behaving and engaging with these spaces. And we're going to ask them, what are the things that would feel the most rewarding to you? And what are the things that you'd be looking for? And, is there ways that we can bring some of this content into the main, questable parts of the game, or can we create fun side experiences, or can we highlight specific community members or give them a platform, things like that. But that's something that we don't want to be prescriptive at this point. And I think part of that comes from our modding background as well. We need people to get their hands on it, play with it, and then figure out, okay, where is the need, right? How can we address it best?
Okay, so we've spent a bunch of time on UGC and modding and the way you're thinking about that in the community. I'd love to return more to the game. We saw the trailer.
Yep.
Where are if we talk about core gameplay, more so than like the meta experience of the game, what are the opportunities for innovation in RTS today here in 2025 versus like the games we played 20 years ago? Like,
yeah.
Why not just go back to play StarCraft 2? Still a great game. People play
as many people still do,
right? Yeah.
Right.
So it's almost like that World of Warcraft problem again. It's like, okay, you get the huge community, you got StarCraft, you got like what is going to bring a new generation of players in, and also take the players who might have played 20 years ago and get them to try something new?
So a big part of it was that that 4 years of pre-production R&D, over 10,000 hours, working with a team of around 100 volunteers and close to 1,000 playtesters to try to find the silver bullet. How do we drop the skill floor for entering players? How do we reimagine and redesign the UI and UX and the gameplay mechanics so that players can easily get into the experience, even if they've never played an RTS before, while simultaneously keeping all of the complex things that you can do in a StarCraft 2, right? And keeping all of that complex positional micro and macro play that players love to aspire to, love to see, and love to work towards. And we eventually feel that we solved it. A big part of it was redesigning the controls, redesigning aspects of the maps, redesigning parts of the focus, especially around making it more co-op and 2v2 focused. We still obviously are prioritizing 1v1, but we also aggressively designed all of our immortals to function very well in 2v2 and co-op environments. But a big part of it was just the controls and the maps. So what I mean by that is we have a lot of players coming in. And for example, we were part of RTS Fest on Steam back in January. And we had a number of players in our community. Most of our community are hardcore RTS players. Makes sense, right? But a lot of them, when they're looking for a social experience to play with their friends, aren't playing RTS. It's primarily a 1v1 experience after all. But instead, they're playing MOBAs. Makes sense. They're adjacent communities. And a lot of MOBA players today used to be RTS players. And so they brought a lot of their MOBA friends into our game during RTS Fest. A bunch of MOBA players that said, I don't like RTS, or I don't play it, or I don't play it anymore, and had all of them really like the game. And one of the comments we kept hearing is, wow, controlling my army feels like controlling a MOBA hero. And that was something we did very mindfully. When you are casting all of your army's abilities, instead of them being all over the keyboard, your army's abilities are on Q, W, E, R, F, just where they'd be for MOBA heroes. We have skill shots that are somewhat similar to MOBA skill shots. When you would normally only want to use one unit to cast an ability, if you click the button and cast it, only one, the closest or the most reasonable of those units, casts that ability. So we've taken a lot of the micromanagement and the complexity, right? Tabbing, and then of course your whole army, right? You can cast all the spells from your whole army at once. You don't have to tab between different unit types or anything like that. We have condensed into a unified command card and made hotkeys out of all of the things that players would normally want to do in RTS, right? A single hotkey for all building, a single hotkey for all army management. One of the other things we introduced is a feature that we call Build Assist. Build Assist is effectively a very simple kind of computer helping you to construct a set selection of units. So you can choose up to 3 different units that you want to focus on building towards. And if you're floating a very large amount of resources, which most players that have a lot of experience in RTS games know it is really problematic, because if those resources are in your bank, they're not out on the battlefield and you're probably getting ready to lose, right? But if you're floating a certain amount of resources, the game will start to build the production structures necessary and the tech structures necessary to construct those units, and will produce them at a macro level behind the scenes. People often ask us, well, won't that completely screw up high-level play? It doesn't, because of the floating resource cap. We actually introduced it secretly just before a community tournament between a bunch of high-level players, without telling them that it was in the game. And then we asked them at the end of the tournament what they thought of Build Assist, and none of them knew that it existed, right? Because a high-skill player is spending their resources efficiently. But for a low-skill player, right, if I bring friends that don't have experience in RTS, one of the things they're doing is they're zooming in and out on the units. They're clicking on units for barks, right? They're moving scouts around the map just to see things. They aren't really paying any attention to their economy. The fantasy, the fun in RTS is controlling a big army, right? Being Aragon at the gates of Mordor and leading the armies of men, right? Like, and that's the fantasy and that's the fun that we want players to get to. It's no fun if you never build an army. So we make sure that even low skill players get an army. They're not going to be as skilled with it, and it's not going to be as big as somebody who's actually building their own buildings and keeping up on timing attacks and things. But they're still going to have the core experience. They're going to have fun. They're going to be able to win some engagements. One of the other things that we did is we took a couple other lessons from MOBAs. One of them is we have camps out on the map. And those camps will reward Pyre. Pyre is a third resource that can be used to cast these ultimate immortal abilities thing. Like Age of Mythology. Immortals are kind of Age of Mythology or Command & Conquer General style avatars. Some of them can appear on the battlefield. Others are these generals that are effectively your avatar, but they can cast super powerful abilities throughout the map. You can collect those resources by collecting these camps or mining them. And that encourages people to go out onto the map, make it so that they aren't turtling in their base, and have early skirmishes. It also means that because there's a real advantage to getting out on the map, we can create a slightly stronger defender's advantage. So there's a lot of interesting ways that we have balanced these systems against each other to create a gameplay experience that is rapid, is fun, gets you into the action very quickly, makes sure that even if you're a low skill player, you have an army, makes it so that controlling your army is so much easier than any RTS I think that's ever been created, while simultaneously you can individually assign every single unit to, custom hotkey groups and do really, really crazy plays that would make a Korean professional proud. So we've dealt with a lot of these opportunities and these solutions to this problem.
Okay, so I heard a couple of things there, and I think it's interesting to maybe distill from what you said some of the broader lessons for people thinking about making any kind of game, not only like an RTS game. But one thing I heard you say that I think I heard you say is a lot of the original market for RTS games, the players of RTS games, effectively moved on to MOBA games and never really returned to the RTS genre after they embraced MOBA games. That's sort of one dynamic that was with the original market of RTS players. And it sounds like the other dynamic is that RTS games that continue to be built with the same sort of user interface schema and set of user expectations, like the high level of macro, the tabbing around to a zillion units, and hotkeying your 1 through 10 and knowing where you're supposed to go and jumping back and around like all of that stuff is maybe a bit of a turnoff to the brand new player who's used to much more streamlined user interfaces with more immediacy. So you RTS games that have been trying to enter the market have been dealing with that kind of double dynamic. Like RTS games just are not catering towards today's gamer, and the old market sort of moved to a new subgenre. So it feels like the broader game development lesson is, number one, you learned from the MOBA genre, and you didn't say, well, the goal is to just go back to RTS. It was like, actually learn what people loved about MOBAs and try to reapply some of that learning back to the RTS genre, so you could capture like today's gamer who doesn't necessarily want that same level of micromanagement or fiddly UI controls. And it seems like that's something that applies to like a lot of games, not just the one that you're building.
Strong agree. So I think even beyond that, one of the interesting things is we were curious. We did a tournament back with our mod with a bunch of professional players, a bunch of Korean esports pros, European esports pros, to kind of do the final check the balance, check the gameplay. We made them do a 2v2 tournament, which is pretty bizarre for StarCraft professionals because, that they only ever do 1v1. And then at the end, we surveyed them. We had over 90% positive feedback. We had Korean esports pros that said, man, if this game came out tomorrow, I'd drop StarCraft 2 and I'd play this instead. And a big part of it, or at least one of the things that was commented to us that really stuck with me, is some of them saying, for the first time, I feel that I can actually execute what my brain is thinking as fast as I'm thinking it. Because one of the big issues with fiddly controls, we think of it as a huge barrier for low skill players. It is, right? It's a real pain for those players to try to figure out, right? If they're hitting all these buttons, trying to figure out just how to build a worker or how to get the workers to go back to mine because they accidentally pulled them all off and now they're behind on economy or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of little challenges. But for high skill players, the fact that we've streamlined it, the fact that you can cast abilities with your whole army, and the fact that we've hotkeyed so you don't have to keep going back to your base and click things. You can just hit the Z key for production, build all of the units you want while still looking at the battlefield in the middle of a battle. It means that they can do even more complex tactical and strategic engagements with their army. And it keeps the focus of the match on the battlefield where it really should be, both from a viewer and a player perspective. So it is about appealing to the modern player, absolutely. It's about appealing to MOBA players, in terms of comfort. But it is a different experience than a MOBA, right? MOBAs, you're focused on this single unit. RTS, you get to create a base. You get to build an army. Somebody recently described it to me, and I liked this description as the way you play Immortal, building your whole army that you can control so easily like a MOBA character. It's almost like you're building and customizing your perfect MOBA character, right? You're upgrading it, you're getting all of the units you want, you're doing all of these cool things. And I really liked that. I thought that was an interesting way to look at it as well. But as we've seen with Tempest Rising and its success, there's still a lot of players that either have nostalgia or simply love the different fantasy. RTS really gives a different fantasy than any other game genre, right? Building and expanding and getting to play these multiple games in one, right? It's a base building game. It's a tactics game. It's a strategy game. It's a MOBA. It's kind of all these things at once, right? Which has always been one of its issues in terms of complexity, but been one of the fantasies that you get to execute on when you play it well. But we believe that we can capture a lot of people that are looking for that fantasy, but that have struggled to get into some of the more traditional RTS games or have found some of the modern ones a bit too easy or a bit too shallow. We think that we offer the way forward, and we'd expect that a lot of other games will copy us in the future.
So you were mentioning the professional players a little while ago, which kind of brings up esports generally. So I think that's an interesting area to explore as well. So let me maybe unpack a few things that I'm curious about your perspective on. So a lot of people have tried to build games sort of for like esports baked into the game. Largely hasn't been that successful, right? Like, and I think the learning mostly on that is you can create an esport once there's millions of people playing the game and you have scale, then
Yep.
an esport can naturally emerge. But trying to build it for that can be really, really challenging. That's just an observation. I might be right or wrong about that. Curious about your perspective. And then another piece is, it seems to me like really hard to strike this balance in your game design and development around, on the one hand, making sure that you can engage a mainstream player and just make it fun for sort of everybody. The professional player is you're describing it as like low skill players or super. The professional player is playing at this whole other level where
It's a different game.
like they're not, yeah, exactly. They're not really playing the same game in certain ways. And catering to them can be really hard because that maybe takes you off the mainstream player, which is actually going to get you to that scale that's important. So I'm curious your just thoughts on that. I may be right or wrong about anything I just said, so we can cover that. But like, how do you strike the balance between those different audiences, and where does esports fit in when you start thinking of that in the development process of a game like SunSpear?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of the issues and a lot of the pitfalls that teams have run into in the past. This is gonna sound like I don't know, maybe like an overly simple answer, but we very much believe that if you build the game right, and if you take all of those needs into account, and we aren't trying to balance between what low skill players need and what high skill players need. We are looking at the 100 options and trying to find the one that drives both of those experiences forward rather than compromising one for the other. We genuinely think that, for instance, the things with the streamlined controls, that is something, the way that we have laid out the control scheme is so much faster and easier and better for high skill players. In fact, some high skill players use a special keyboard layout called the core that was designed literally to create the most efficient possible keyboard layout for pro players. Some of the SC2 pros still use it today. Those guys that made the core, one of them is one of the co-founders. Another one was like our first employee after the co-founders. They're on our team and they're the ones that did the layout for us, right? They're some of the best UX guys and UI guys that I've ever seen. The goal is not to say, how do we balance these? It's to say, we need to address all, 6 of these key kind of player experiences and skill levels. And every solution that we have has to further that experience in some way. It cannot take away from one of the others. And that has made the process and the design process, like I said, it was about a 4-year R&D process. It was really intense. We created 3 full different mods, and we had to throw the first 2 away because we got to a point that no matter how much we iterated, they were not matching every single criteria we had, right? Sometimes we joke that they, burned down, fell into the swamp. But the 5th one stayed up. And that's the one that we ultimately built out of. So in terms of building for esports, yeah, you should not build a game expecting to be an esport from day one. Obviously, Dota 2 did that strategy relatively successfully. There were reasons that I think that worked for them. But there are a lot of corpses on that road. And it is dangerous because at the end of the day, the number one thing that makes a great esport ahead of everything else is a fun game that a lot of people want to play, right? And so that should be your first, second, and third priority. Then if the game is really successful, now you're thinking about, well, how will this fit into those spaces? But kind of like I mentioned between the high skill and low skill, we did think about what the viewer experience is going to be. And we think that's relevant not just for esports, but also for streamers, for Twitch, for influencers, right? One of the old user acquisition model for marketing in games, I think, is largely dead. And a lot of it is much more focused around influencers, people that are passionate about your game, that are sharing that with their fans and with their friends. And so we wanted to create an experience that was great for a viewer, not just a player. And that was always something that was baked into it. But I wouldn't say that we did it going like, this is going to be an esport from day one. It's something that we said, this makes the game better. And every time we said we cannot introduce a feature that's good for viewers, but is not good for players, right? It has to serve both needs.
I want to double click on that because I've heard this idea from a lot of developers for as long as streaming has existed, making the game entertaining for viewers as well as how do you do that? Like what? Without knowing the game already, right? Like people watch StarCraft because they played StarCraft a ton, and then they can appreciate like what's going on in the game. So,
well, I appreciate you bringing up StarCraft because I think StarCraft is one of the more interesting shouts. StarCraft, I don't have the most current data, but for a long time, in terms of the ratio between viewers to players, StarCraft 2 had the highest in the world, right? It was like 1 viewer for every 4 players or something, which is just an insane number compared to most games. There are a lot of people that watch StarCraft 2 that don't play it, a huge number of them, because the game is very difficult to get into. They struggle with the controls, but it's a relatively easy game to watch in some ways. I actually think RTS has many gifts when it comes to the viewer experience, in that because it's armies smashing into armies, contextually, even if you don't fully understand all the units or you don't fully understand all of the skill shots, it's pretty easy to see when one army, catches another army in a pincer movement and destroys it. There's that moment of tension and release and excitement. Whereas if you're watching MOBA, right? If you're watching League of Legends, very popular esport, but I think most of the people watching that understand the game pretty deeply, because otherwise, when there's a 5v5 battle happening in the midfield, like it's very hard to understand what's going on unless you know those characters and you understand what those moves do. There are also issues with first-person shooters, tac shooters, things like that, right? These guys are spinning and shooting and flying around the map and June, gotta kill, boom, gotta kill, boom, gotta kill. Unless you know how the map is, unless you know what the weapons do and things like that, you probably don't understand what's going on. And the perspective changes can also be a bit jarring for folks. Whereas RTS, it's pretty clear. So what do we do to make it more exciting to watch? One of the things I mentioned, better for both players and for viewers, we keep focus on the battlefield. And a lot of how we redesigned controls and how we made it so that you can do pretty much everything you need with just hotkeys, without needing to go back to your base, without needing to click and select a worker and click and build a building, right? You can just hit the C button for construction, choose the buildings you want. You can hit Z for production, D for your army, right? Like it's the unified command card makes it so that you can stay on top of the battle where it's happening. One of the issues that StarCraft 2 has is that constant back and forth between base and battle. One of the other ways is the immortal powers. Each of our immortals has 4 unique powers, and they appear on the battlefield, cast these huge spells that can really swing the outcome of a battle, right? Mala has an ability that rains blood that makes it so all of her casting units regain mana at a very, very fast clip and regain health. All of a sudden, a battle that might seem kind of equal is now very one-sided, and it's got a huge, beautiful VFX effect, right? Like it seems very dramatic, kind of like when ults is happening in a MOBA or something. So that also creates very clear moments that a viewer can tap into and go, oh, this is a high tension, high excitement moment. That's amazing. one of the other things is just the immortals themselves, right? Having these additional characters that represent the player themselves, right? That people identify with. So a lot of those sort of things I think really help. And then of course some tooling related stuff, right? Viewer modes and the delay that happens there. And things like that. So it's really easy to cast. It's really easy to have tournaments, and we try to create tools behind the scenes to make it easier for the community to show off the game to others.
So Ian, a little while ago, you were mentioning how you went through a whole bunch of editions or iterations of your mod. You had a really high bar for like what was going to work. I love that relentless iteration. It reminds me a lot of when I was developing a Star Trek game. We actually developed like 5 almost completely different things. There was a core like concept that we wanted to be very true to like the philosophy and storytelling of Star Trek, to not be like overly focused on the violent aspects, although violence is also part of Star Trek, but it's like 1/3, not like most of like a Star Wars. So we had to build like 5 versions of the game over a year.
Yeah.
And the first 4 just weren't going to cut it, and the last one was pretty good.
Yeah.
So we stuck
Burned down, fell over, sank into the swamp.
Yeah. But the question I want to ask you in like the final minutes that we've got together here today is, so that's sort of one lesson I think for developers, which is like relentless iteration and ship.
Yeah.
Get feedback, and like, because you can't build in a vacuum, right? You gotta ship. So for the game developers out there, what are your biggest lessons that you would like to share with people? Like, what could people learn from this so that they can be more successful in their game project at whatever stage they happen to be building at?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did really well from the get-go is we recognized that we needed the right people that were really passionate about this, that had the right culture, that were able to set their egos aside and invest that ego collectively in the process of becoming right rather than being right? Like that's something we talk about, where a lot of times we go, oh, well, this is my idea, right? And I'm really invested in it. But we've really invested ourselves in this iterative process where we go, ooh, this is a testable idea. That's exciting. Let's see how it plays with the community. Let's do some internal testing and solve this. And we celebrate failures as well. So one of my ideas way back in the day was to create this, like, I don't know, summonable golem that goes and attacks your enemy, kind of almost Alterac Valley from World of Warcraft style or something. And we said, man, okay, it's good for, it's interesting for players. It's interesting for, some of this back and forth, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's test it. We tested it, and it really didn't work. It warped the gameplay way too much, and it made a lot of elements of how the gameplay balance and back and forth and skirmishes were kind of drop away. And so we had a party, and we killed it. And we were like, woo! That's one bad idea that didn't get into the game. Not even that it was a bad idea, but it was one that made the game worse rather than better. One thing that people often forget is that for every 10 really good features in your game, if there's one bad feature, that's the one players are going to remember. The bad part of the UI, the bad part of the UX, the bad voice actor, right? The good voice actors, they're going to get carried away and flow through. But if there's one really bad voice actor, especially in your main cast, that's going to really stick out to people. And so focus on making sure that you take all of the pain points away as much as possible from the players. Focus on iteration. One of the other things is iterate quickly and early, right? Sketch out maps or level designs on paper. Make a cutout of Mario, run through it, think about what that's going to look like. If you're trying to do a card game or something, make sure you make a physical card game with the cards that you think should be in there. Play it, see how it functions, right? Everything that you can do to test aspects of the game first, or use modding programs or things like that to test out things in a controlled environment. But you don't really want to get to the point that you've put in a year of art and technical work only to realize that the game you're building isn't really something that's working for players, right? You should have enough feedback and enough support at that point. And that's the other thing, is don't be afraid to kill the bad ideas when they come up, right? Like we did with our first 2 mods, where we said, okay, we could keep iterating on this, but I think we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to start with some different fundamental concepts here.
Yeah, just because you build something, you don't have to ship it.
You do not. And most of the time you shouldn't. And there is a lot of slop out there where people made the wrong choice.
It's sort of by, this is why I created Beamable, by the way, because there's so many things you have to do in game development.
Yep.
We just wanted to take a whole bunch of stuff off the table so that you weren't like working on complicated scaling issues and server issues like that. So you can go back to the fun, because the fun is actually all that matters. Like your player doesn't care what your server tech is unless it fails. Then they care a lot. But otherwise,
but that's the key thing.
Right.
Well, and actually, I'll give you guys Beamable a quick shout out, because you guys, the service that you provide and the way that you are supporting teams like us, that I'd say we're like too big to be indie, but we're definitely far away from AAA, right? And we are kind of in this tweener stage where a lot of services don't work, right? Some of the big service providers are crazy expensive, or they don't have the kind of personal attention to our needs and our matchmaking needs and things like that. You guys have been awesome every step of the way. Every time we've needed something tweaked, with matchmaking and things like that, it's really worked remarkably well. And you guys have been supportive of us, even helping to reach out to investors and stuff on our behalf. So one of the other things I guess I'd say overall about the industry is there's a lot of great people in it. And if you can find them, stick with them, plant your flags together, and find the people that really buy into your vision. And I really love what you guys have been doing. I think you're doing a lot of interesting stuff, and you've been great to work with. And we appreciate your support.
Thank you, Ian. I really am grateful for the kind words about Beamable, and hope other people get to discover us from this and check it out if they're building anything with multiplayer and online component. That's where we can help. So you can go back and just focus on the fun, because that's what's actually going to matter. And then ship, iterate, learn, keep building, build a great game. So, Ian, this has been an awesome conversation. Thanks. I feel like I just learned a lot. I just got a master class in RTS. I want to take the 10-hour version now and become even more of an expert. But
let's get together at one of these shows one of these years, and I'll buy you a couple beers. And I would love to hear more about some of your lessons for game development as well. I'm always so curious, because everybody in this industry has just amazing stories to tell.
Thank you, Ian. All right, well, that's a wrap. You've spent another hour with us. Really enjoy it, the conversation, Ian. Thank you to the audience. We're over 500 people here watching live. So thanks to all of you who decided to spend the last hour with us and learn about RTS games and SunSpear in particular.
And I'll say, if you enjoyed the show, please check out our Steam page and feel free to wish list it. You'll get updates. We're looking to do an early access later this year, so keep an eye out for that.
Fantastic. Yeah, everybody play SunSpear, especially if you love RTS games. Give it a shot. All right. Thank you, Ian. Thanks, Oscar, for keeping us together here. Until next time,